Adaptations. Sometimes fans act like we don't like these adaptations, but sometimes we actually do. That's because sometimes each new version of a story, book to film, or sometimes even film to TV show and vice versa, changes the original but adds something new and amazing. So this week, we will explore the pros and cons of adaptations.
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Welcome to Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, whose mission is to help you escape bad books and find the best Christian-made fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm E. Stephen Burnett, and I publish Lorehaven, not changing anything that you don't like. And I'm the author of Above the Circle of Earth, a science fiction novel that launched from Enclave Publishing last year.
And I'm Zachary Russell, and the digital version of me is much better than the analog version, which is fighting a cold. And this is episode 304. When was the film better than the book?
Zach suggested this topic, and at first I thought, well, isn't it always true that the book is better than the movie? But then we started talking about examples and realized, no, there are some cases where you could argue that the movie or TV show is actually better than the book. So we'll talk about those instances.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, my middle daughter literally has a shirt that says the book was better, which she loves wearing, especially when we go to the movies for said book adaptation. And I think it's generally true, like he said, but it is fun to think of the edge cases where it's not. And even like when it comes to remakes and things, because we're so tempted to be cynical when a book is being made into a movie, or a movie is being made again or into a streaming series. And, you know, there's something about that, right? That's probably, there's an intuitive truth to that. It's like, are they just doing this again to make more money off of us and ruin everything? Or are they actually trying to fix something? And is it going to be better? And it's just great to be hopeful sometimes, because there's plenty of podcasts that'll just tell you everything wrong with everything. And we try to keep it positive here.
Well, I will give one example at the top here is the live action Disney version of Cinderella, directed by Sir Kenneth Branagh. It is my favorite example of a case where the film version is undoubtedly better than the animated version, which is mostly about the mice anyway. And yes, it's all classical and has gorgeous Disney 1950s animation, et cetera, I know. But the live version is just so much better in terms of how it develops the characters. It's a very different take on it, but it's still extremely faithful to the original fairy tale. It is the most Narnian movie I think that I have seen, and that includes the actual Narnia movies. Hey, speaking of fairy tales, we have a new review at Lorehaven for a novel by Angie Dickinson called The Star Blessed. You can go to lorehaven.com and see that. We do new reviews of the best Christian-made fantastical novels every Friday, and you can subscribe free to get updates. We'll also send you the exclusive access code to join the Lorehaven Guild, our castle in the cloud on Discord, which features monthly quests into these kinds of books. Our top sponsor is Firebreak by Kathy Tyers from our friends at Enclave Publishing. What would you sacrifice to save your family and your home world? Lady Firebird Caldwell returns to the world of her birth, Nataya, intending to introduce her young sons to the noble electors, while her husband Brennan conducts a military inspection. When mysterious ships in distress suddenly approach the planet, the electorate sends her to initiate first contact. Forced to work alongside a vengeful childhood enemy, Firebird uses everything within her power, even her passion for music, to negotiate, only to discover their alien technology threatens all the worlds she holds dear. Facing ruthless betrayal, Firebird undertakes a deadly journey to salvage the mission. Brennan must make daring use of his telepathic powers to save human life in the galactic whirl, including that of their young sons. But saving the worlds might force Brennan to give the order that would mean Firebird's death. In a galaxy poised on the edge of ruin, survival may demand the ultimate sacrifice from them both. Enclave Publishing is excited to announce the March 10 release of Firebreak, Book 1 in the new Firebird Interlude trilogy by Kathy Tyers. She's the Carol and Christie Award-winning author and best-selling author of Star Wars, The Truce at Bakura. Firebreak is now available. Ask for it at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order it online from Amazon. It's also available as an audiobook from Oasis Audio. Breaking news from our friends at Realm Makers as well. In honor of their 2026 conference and expo, I think they now have a quorum of keynote speakers, and that includes Kathy Tyers and Steve Taylor, and recently announced last week, Bill Myers. Zach, you may remember, he was one of our first guests on the show. I was at a virtual conference with him in 2020 and was finally able to meet one of my heroes. I used to enjoy his books a lot growing up. He writes middle grade fiction and all kinds of other stuff, and so I'm looking forward to hearing more about his story at this premier gathering for Christian storytellers of fantasy and science fiction, the Realm Makers 2026 Conference and Expo, calling all authors and artists in the industries of graphic novels, gaming, animation, and audio drama, as well as film and TV. Realm Makers is where you will find your tribe, own your craft, and advance your career. Registration is now open for this in-person and virtual event this June 24th through 27th, 3 full days at the St. Louis Union Station Hotel. 3 full days of training from professionals, plus the epic Realm Awards costume banquet to celebrate the best novels released last year. Readers are invited to the expo on Friday and Saturday. Shopping is free for the general public, and tickets are required to attend the sessions and panels, as well as meet and greets with special guests. Learn more at realmmakers.com. You can also go to lorehaven.com/podcast for all of the sponsor links, including that one there for Firebreak by Kathy Tyers. Zach, let's start with some hot takes. Why not? I think you're bringing most of those here. Some unconventional takes ahead for Chapter 1, when the film was better than the book. How would you like to start us off?
Oh, let's just jump in the deep end. I think the Lord of the Rings films are better than the books.
Boo this man. Boo! 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 By the way, the Princess Bride movie was better than the book, but I disagree. But
okay. Well, I'll make my case. I have rewatched the movies so very many times, and I've only reread the books once-ish. Like, I read them originally 30 years ago, and I'm rereading them, or at least re-listening to them with the Andy Serkis audiobook, which is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with the books, and I guess that's my big thing I want to say here. But I enjoy the experience of the movie better than the book, and I think the movies were a very faithful adaptation, even with Peter Jackson, having his own worldview that's different than Tolkien's, even with him coming from sort of a horror background, which actually worked in some cases. I think about the movies so much, in the popular imagination, the movies are the books. Like, the movies are the story of the Lord of the Rings for most people. I think most people are not going to read the book, but it's okay. I think you get the essence of the book from the, you guys are probably going to think I read The Message or something by the way I'm talking about this, I'm sure. no shade to anyone who does. But I really do think that the movies are maybe so it's more of a thought for thought, translation than a word for word, literal ESV, clunky adaptation. But they are so good that I can't find any flaws with the movies, not any major flaws. And yeah, you could nitpick how it's better. It's not saying that every change is better, every thing about it is great, but fundamentally, I don't see any brokenness at all with the movies.
Fascinating.
All right, so feel free to disagree.
Well, I don't need to. I'm just going to skip ahead here a few headings and let our listeners know that if they have any feedback for this episode, they can send that to podcast@lorehaven.com or tag us on the socials at Lorehaven, wherever you get your socials. Yeah, this could be the whole episode, really, as to which is better, the Lord of the Rings films or the books. I will just say that, and as you know, I'm sure you get more out of the books simply because it's so immersive for hours and hours and hours. And people will make jokes about the extended cuts of the films for sure, but the books are, and each book in audiobook version is like 20 hours long. So you've got like a whole week and a half of listening if you were to do it nonstop, at least the way that Andy Serkis reads it. And even just reading it on your own, there's a deeper kind of pleasure for what's on the page. And I will argue that the films largely distilled the essence of the books, and I think people will forgive a lot of the changes just because obviously the heart is there and the characters are largely the same. We'll talk more about that in the next chapter. I will say, Zach, that I understand the feeling that you have there in part because I think I have that with Dune. Now, that may be partly my fault because I caught up to Dune fairly late. I read the book maybe about a year before the film came out, mainly as homework, but of course I enjoyed it. I'd not read it before then. And I do think, and I think this opinion will actually age well, given the weirdness that fans talk about in the rest of the books. I do think that Dune films are largely more accessible than the novels. So maybe that's kind of a key thought of what you're saying there, accessibility. It enables people who either haven't the time or the discipline or just the ability to read a book that may take hours and hours and hours to see a 3.5 hour film version and get the gist of it and have a great time. Maybe they get in 3.5 hours what a book reader would have gotten in 12 hours. And I think that happens at least with Dune. Maybe I need to reread Dune. I think I would argue my own argument there against myself that you get a lot more of the world building and it's more immersive over a longer period of time. I don't know if I'd say it's about quality versus quantity, but maybe it does come down to that.
Yeah, I think what often sticks out in people's minds with movie adaptations is when a character is totally different or so much is truncated, you would only really understand it if you read the book, or there's a lack of sincerity or a lack of honor being given to the original. And certainly, we could do nothing on this podcast except talk about that. And you know what? There's already YouTube channels that do plenty of that, so we don't need to. But what I like about, the Dune adaptation, the Lord of the Rings adaptation, is it seems like the same characters from the books. It just seems like, okay, you're getting a slightly different version. Like I said, it's like the Message or the NIV versus the ESV maybe, but the heart is there. You can still just spend all day with these characters. And, even like you mentioned, the extended versions, I love the extended versions. I will watch those much more willingly than the theatrical cut. So it's not about length. It's not about, the film is better because it's shorter than the audiobook or whatever. No, I want the longer version of it. But I think it's because there's so much sincerity in the movie versions of those books that I don't feel like I'm getting cheated out of something from watching it instead of reading it. And then there's the whole, there's the whole problem with Tom Bombadil and why that was cut out of the movie. And I agree so much. Now that I'm rereading it, I agree so much that Peter Jackson cut him out of the movie. And I saw a great little essay on X recently about this. And it talks about how the issue with Tom Bombadil for the story, even not even just the movie, but for the story itself, is that he is totally disconnected from what's happening in the world. He's like Methuselah or something. He's just like this random guy that appears. And you're like, what is this dude doing in this story? He does not seem bothered at all about Sauron or the orcs or anything going on. And okay, that's kind of a neat picture of resilience and kind of living your best life now and just, being moisturized and in your lane and all that. But what does that have to do with the story? Like, it's so random that, again, it's been a while since I've read the later books. So I can't remember if he comes back in the other ones, but I don't think so. I think he's just in the first book.
No, and my theory remains.
The movie was correct by removing him.
Yeah, I agree. My theory is that Tom Bombadil is a self-insert for Tolkien, and we may never know why. We will have to ask him someday when we get there. But I know that even devotees of the books will agree, yeah, okay, Tom Bombadil needed to be cut for pacing, if nothing else. We already had a lot of endings for Return of the King, so we did need to cut the Scouring of the Shire. But they, in the films, found ways to allude to those things anyway. Like kind of, I mean, for plot purposes, of course, but when Frodo looks in the mirror of Galadriel, he sees Scouring of the Shire and a potential future should he fail. And then Treebeard in the extended cut of Two Towers is actually reenacting the scene with Old Man Willow speaking the lines for Tom Bombadil. So that's what you mean kind of by a remix of those themes. If they understand the themes well enough and the characters are largely the same, fans will forgive. Most fans will forgive big changes like that. I feel the same way about the Pendragon cycle. We haven't had a whole episode about that yet, but I still got to finish it because then One Piece came along and, I got keel-hauled onto that ship. But they remixed a lot of the events, whereas the books, especially Merlin, are much more linear. They felt it best to do like kind of a flashback structure where you catch up to Merlin later in life and then go back and kind of try to understand his motives. Now, there's some flaws there in that you don't really know yet what Merlin's motives are. He's more of an enigma, so you can't really connect with him. There's more connecting with people around him. Whereas in Stephen Lawhead's book, Merlin is the first person character the whole way through. So you just have to adjust your expectations a little bit. And I still don't know yet whether I would say that the series is as good as the book for different reasons. But I understand the reason for some of their choices. I would just note that, there's a few moments in the series, though, where you feel maybe in one moment more emotion, particularly when Taliesin is talking about his vision for the Kingdom of Summer, than you really feel in the book. It's more spread across the book. It's watered down throughout the history and all of that. But by the end of the book, you have that cumulative effect, whereas the film, there's that word again, distills that into one moment of, landscape and soaring orchestra and all of that. I'll have to finish the series and let you know what I think about it.
Stephen, one other thing I'll say about Dune is, while the book was great, it's written in this omniscient point of view, and a notable thing lacking from the movie was the dinner banquet, where there's all these different plots within plots, feints within feints happening in everyone's head, and it's so tense, but there's nothing visually happening. Right? It's just these little snippets of dialogue, and everyone's about to pull a knife or a gun and kill everyone else. But you can't really film that. And they were right to remove that from the film version. And the film version worked better without it. Something else that worked really well was the Hunger Games movie adaptations. I think they were largely overall better than the books. And the reason why is because in the book, you're just following Katniss's perspective, and she goes into pretty severe PTSD, and it gets pretty disturbing and uncomfortable and kind of unreliable after a while to see everything from her perspective, because you're just kind of descending into madness. And in Wheel of Time, Rand becomes mad from use of the One Power, which is tainted by the Dark One and everything, and it's corrupted. It drives everyone crazy. Well, they don't show the entire series from Rand's perspective. And so in the movie, you get to see a lot more perspectives than just Katniss. And I didn't love how the third book was split into two movies. I felt like that was kind of just a cash cow, but it sort of made it better, and that you get to spend a little more time seeing everything unfold, but they probably could have just done a extended version of that movie rather than split it into two. So again, not everything is necessarily better, but I largely thought that was a very good adaptation.
Well, we'll talk in the next chapter about film or TV versions that make changes yet still win, that are at least as good as the book, even for different reasons. First, however, we have our second sponsor, The Whole Man by Dan Dates. This brand new release won the Aurora Award from Realm Makers, and The Whole Man was endorsed by our own Zach Russell, who loved the realistic action, witty banter, and redemptive heartbeat of the story. The Whole Man is the exciting sci-fi debut by Dan Dates, who is a military test pilot. A dying rebellion, a broken family. Can an executioner bring both back to life? The Whole Man has the ugliest job in the universe. He feeds human sacrifices into a black hole. Disgraced pilot Baird Larson is the Whole Man. He is alone on a space station completing his grim duty. He's told he's appeasing the gods. Baird just wants to finish his penance and return home. But will his daughter even give him a second chance? Then the next sacrifice arrives and she changes everything. Mysia is a poised rebel with a provocative fire. She doesn't beg for mercy. She explodes his beliefs. Torn between duty and treason, Baird must choose: execute another innocent or join the Shadower rebellion against the overlord who made him a monster. The fight ahead is brutal, and Baird's combat skills won't be enough. Can he break free from his past sins, save those he loves, and bring hope to humanity's last outpost among the stars? Or will the hungriest black hole consume him first, the one within himself? The Whole Man is available now in all formats, including a multi-narrator audiobook. You can learn more at sci-fipilot.com or see all the links in that cool cover in our show notes for this episode 304 at lorehaven.com. Chapter 2, When Film Versions Make Changes Yet Still Win. Now, last week, Zach, I was talking about One Piece, the original manga, the anime, and since then, season 2 of the live-action series on Netflix has released, and as of last night, I have seen all of it. We binged it over 4 nights, 2 episodes a night, 8 episodes, and I am pleased to report that it was fantastic, even though it made a lot of changes to the original. Fans are largely forgiving this and actually loving it because, for one thing, the original is so cartoony and so outlandish, with caricatures in this world of pirates with superpowers, fighting to liberate islands and defeat the world government. And there's so many different animals and zany actions and powers that would be very difficult to adapt to live action, but they largely managed to make it work. And Netflix, of all people, and this on top of it being the victim, or at least with the stigma of people would call the anime to live action curse. Well, the One Piece live action season 1 broke the curse, and season 2 just kind of kicks at it a little bit. It's basically broken. And yet there's so much changed from the original. For one example, there's a scene where the pirates are descending basically a waterfall over a mountain. It's almost like a giant flume ride. It's the only way to get into the Grand Line, which is the one sea where you're supposed to go if you want to be a successful pirate and find the final treasure, the One Piece. So they descend down basically this huge waterfall, and then at the bottom there is a whale with its mouth open, and it just swallows them whole. Well, in the original cartoon and the manga, they're inside the whale, and it's like all sunshiny and bright, and you don't see any sun, you just see clouds and all of this. And there's a guy on an island in a lighthouse there. Well, he's actually built all this inside the whale's stomach, and he's painted the inside of the whale, and it's just completely wacky. Well, they couldn't do that for the live action, but they followed the spirit of it. They still end up inside the whale, but one of the crew members is actually separated, and he ends up talking to the lighthouse keeper who's on the outside. But the inside of the whale is still very cartoony. It's more like Monstro from Pinocchio, which obviously inspired that just a little bit. But the themes are still there. The fans love that. They don't even mind if characters who appeared much later in the original story are retconned into this story, because they actually were there in the original. It just took the author a while to find that out. So that's just a great example of the new adaptation following the themes and honoring the original characters so well, even jumping mediums or media between manga/anime to live action. Their essence is absolutely there. It's more like a translation. And I like your example earlier of like the translation of paraphrase versus literal. It's very much like that here, but in this case, it's a faithful translation, and fans, including myself, are absolutely loving it.
Well, at the other end of the spectrum from wacky is the 3-body problem. Not really wacky at all, although there are some pretty crazy things that happen in it. And this is the Chinese sci-fi that came out, I guess it was late 2000s, early 2010s. And it became really popular. I think it was President Barack Obama that mentioned it. And, it's one of those things. Once you get a president to talk about your book, even just in passing, or what was it? Ronald Reagan was holding a Tom Clancy book under his arm, and it became an instant bestseller. But I'll tell you what made the TV show adaptation better. And actually, there's 2 of them. There's the Amazon one and the Netflix one, and I'll briefly talk about the improvements. So 3-body problem follows a applied physicist that is investigating these murders of these top theoretical physicists. And there seems to be a war on science, but this is not the spoiler alert. It's not the Christians that are waging war on science. It's the aliens. And it's a fascinating investigative mystery. It's a very different type of alien invasion story. But in the books, that main character is rather passive, and he's just kind of observing what other characters are doing. So he's not really doing much to change the story. He is just kind of watching other people affect the story. In the Amazon adaptation, which is made by Tencent, a Chinese studio, it is very, very faithful to the events of the books while giving that applied physicist, he works with nanomaterials. He's kind of more of an engineer, I guess you could say, than an applied physicist. They give him a lot more agency. They give him a lot more to do. And he's just a lot more interesting of a character. He's not just a walking camera, as they often criticize the book character. And they tie things together a lot better that were kind of disconnected a little bit and a little hard to follow in the book. But something that the Netflix show does better, which largely I don't like the Netflix adaptation. It's much more abridged. They randomize a lot of the nationalities of the characters, whereas the original book takes place entirely in China for the most part. There is some kind of international stuff that happens in the later book series, but the first book is pretty much entirely just in China. The Netflix adaptation takes place mostly in Oxford, and it's people from all over the world. It's very global, which is again, it's with the spirit of the later books, but not the first one. But something that the Netflix adaptation got right, and did better even than the Amazon adaptation, is that it began the show with this communist struggle session that happened during the Cultural Revolution in China. Now, that is in the book, but it's in a later part of the book because the author didn't want to put that up front in the book for fear of the Chinese censors, who would not like that accurate and true portrayal of a real and sad and tragic period of Chinese history. The Amazon adaptation, they showed a little bit of that. They kind of pulled their punches a little bit, again, because it's made by Tencent Studio, which is a Chinese-owned studio. The Netflix one just went right into it at the beginning and just showed it in its raw kind of brutality, how that played out in history, but also in the story. And it's actually very critical to the story. The story mostly takes place in modern day, but that Cultural Revolution tragedy that plays out in the story, it is extremely critical for one of the characters, for sort of their backstory. And it makes everything make sense that happens after that. In the book, they kind of weave it in, and it's just all these flashbacks, and okay, that can work. In a TV show, you have to kind of get to the point a little quicker. And so I thought they did that very well. And one other thing about that Netflix adaptation, that scene of the Cultural Revolution struggle session was clipped from that show and went viral on Twitter and even some other social media. And it was amazing, first of all, to see everyone talking about one of my favorite sci-fi stories. It's like, hey, yeah, go read the book. It's great. But that scene was so powerful because I think it was a little bit before the election, but but of course, there's always heightened political tensions and discussions on social media. And it was a really good way for our country to kind of see the history of another country. And it's like, hey, we don't want to repeat this, right, guys? Like, we don't want to have this kind of cancel culture to the extreme moment. So, Stephen, did you see those clips? Like, did those ever come across your news feed?
No, I completely missed all of this. Now you make me want to go back and check, although obviously I'd want to read the story before seeing any of the adaptations. It's interesting that in this whole segment, we've spoken glowingly about a lot of streaming service adaptations, and it is popular, especially among Christians and conservatives, to hate on the streaming services, and they do indeed have a lot of slop and a lot of agenda shows. But every once in a while you get something that comes along that is one way or another a faithful adaptation of the original. And then to jump into theaters, back to theaters, I would put The Lord of the Rings as certainly an adaptation that is good on its own merits, even though it does adapt the book a lot. But then you also now have the phenomenon of Amazon, which owns MGM now. Everybody's buying everybody. They are releasing the next week theatrical release of Project Hail Mary, which, based on all the trailers and all the acclaim and all of that, appears to be a very faithful adaptation of Andy Weir's book as well. I haven't seen it yet. My wife and I have tickets. I'll be able to talk about it more next week. But that is absolutely another example of what seems to be understanding the heart of the story, which I won't spoil here for Project Hail Mary, even though the trailers do.
Oh, man.
But that too, I mean, people got upset with the trailers a little bit because they did spoil a rather big reveal in Project Hail Mary.
Multiple big reveals. But you know, I was thinking about that. It's probably good that they did that, because if you had just shown everything else, besides those big spoilers, which I don't even want to mention, because if you listener have not seen them, don't see the trailers, just go see the movie. But if you didn't see those moments, the movie would appear like an indie sci-fi film. It would appear like a very low budget, low stakes. Oh, it's just kind of a journey of self-discovery, and we're just alone on a spacecraft talking to ourselves. And it's not even The Martian, where he's like talking back to Earth on a 10-minute delay or something. He's just kind of, Dear Diary. It would totally look like that if that's all you showed. If you didn't show the other things, it's going to be a really good like hero's journey story is how it looks like they're adapting. And that's kind of why they did the trailer the way they did. So I've come to accept it, even though I've intentionally not watched the latest trailer, because I just want to go enjoy the movie. And I know I will, because man, they've been dropping all of these. They've lifted the embargo on critic reviews way early with this, which
I did notice that. It's like 3 weeks early.
Right. Which someone was telling me with a recent movie a couple of years ago. I can't remember which one now. But whenever there's a really bad movie, they do not release that embargo until like the day of the theatrical release. Because they're like, well, people have already bought tickets. It's kind of too late to go back now. But man, they've been letting these out for weeks now.
Well, I am so grateful that anybody, especially Amazon, for that matter, is putting this much emphasis on a theatrical release. I think maybe we will see some returned energy to the theaters when the stories are more classical, when they are focused on, like you said, Zach, the hero's journey, when they are respecting the books and previous adaptations of the book. I've mentioned One Piece, but honoring the original manga by Ichiro Oda, but they also in the show respect so much of the original anime. There's music throughout the original score. There are shout outs to particular, like there's a song where they use the exact tune from the anime. And for the English version, they actually use the English dub. So the English dub people, who often don't get a lot of love, I mean, even I watch the sub instead of the dub, they were crowing because, hurrah, they used our translation. And there's other little shout outs like that. But then with Project Hail Mary, you get this instance of really emphasizing the humanity of the story. I mean, to a fault, it's a humanist story. God is nowhere near the story, and neither is the Virgin Mary for that matter. So Catholics get a little polite nod in the name of the ship and the movie and the book, and that's it. But they also honor Ray Porter, who is the narrator of the audiobook. And that's how I was introduced to the story. Apparently, lots of people loved his narration, not just me. And there's been pictures of him with the new actor from the film, and it's just cool to see that they're honoring those who did previous adaptations, and that just is a great way to show respect for everyone, not just the author Andy Weir. Speaking of science fiction, I've got to close here with our sponsorships for another pitch for my novel, Above the Circle of Earth, now contracted for sequels. I am hard at work now on books 2 and 3, moving into the future. But book 1, Above the Circle of Earth, is now available in all systems, audiobook, yes, as well as hardcover and digital. Give us a few months too, and we'll have a paperback for you. This is a story of Brock and Alicia Rivers, who live in a future where all religions but one are segregated on Earth in districts called preserves. this is a humanism ruled world. It turns out that some classical humanists have taken over all the space agencies, and they are forging this new scientific future of discovery. Well, Brock and Alicia feel that the gospel may have something to do with that as well, but unfortunately, due to their disastrous decision, they were exiled to Mars. 7 years and a lot of hard living later, they are summoned back to Earth to start the space mission. Evangelism isn't allowed on Earth, but it might get done in space. Unfortunately, the one world cause isn't going to like that, and neither are some of their own people. That's going to lead to a lot of conflicts and answers, and to the big question of how do you go therefore into the world as Christ has told us while also protecting your people. That's Above the Circle of Earth from Enclave Publishing. And you can see more about that at estephenburnett.com. Subscribe for updates. I will tell you whenever I can more about those next two sequels in this series. Chapter 3, When Remade Versions Beat Earlier Versions. Now, this one's kind of fun because we've mentioned that there have been stories that have been remade, twice, 3 times occasionally, not necessarily because the previous one was bad, but because somebody wants to have another take on it. And I think we almost always now think about superheroes, and I think there are some cases where remade versions of the superhero are better than the earlier version. And Zach, last year I was thinking about the Fantastic Four First Steps. I do think it's better, with flaws and all, than the original mid-2000s version, and certainly better than the dark version, which was plagued by production problems by that I forget exactly what was going on with that. I never saw it. I think a few other people did, but it certainly is better. At the same time, though, those are such popular level examples that I wonder if maybe we have some, more niche examples that you may have to offer of remakes that were actually better than the previous remake or the previous adaptation.
Stephen, one TV show that is, I guess, I can't remember if it came out after the movie, but is Avatar: The Last Airbender. My older teens love that show. I have heard nothing bad about it, and yet I have heard nothing good about the movie.
Yeah, no one likes the movie. It is a very unfortunate instance of that kind of weird late 2010s or early 2010s sensibility. It definitely started off as an animated series. There was no book. It was just the show. The show is the original. It's OG. Frequently remade, never equaled. The movie was terrible, but then Netflix, again, decided, hey, let's do a live action version of this. And it is generally pretty good. Everybody looks like their parts, and most people even act like their parts. The only exception was Gran, who was not a great actor. Took me straight out of the show. Absolute dead ringer for Gran from the original book 1, Water, in the animated series. But I guess it's because she was out the South Pole. Bless her heart, but her acting was like a block of ice.
So the live action was better than the movie live action, but was the live action streaming series better than the animated streaming series?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah,
okay.
It's definitely
somewhere in between.
Skews older. The characters' ages skew older.
Okay.
They double down on the mature themes that are a little more subtle in the animated series. It's obviously more violent, but at least it looks better, and the cast is pretty good. I think the young man, Ian Owsley, who plays Sokka, is probably the best. And by the way, he's a Christian too, so I guess that makes it his part of it a Christian show. The lad playing Aang is also pretty good, and Katara might need to, I don't know. Her acting also seemed a little lackluster in some areas, but that's for a pop culture podcast to take down. Either way, I think that adaptation is at least aspiring to the goodness of the original animated series. And you can just sort of forget the M. Night Shyamalan movie. I don't know what that was going on with.
You can kind of forget everything he made after Unbreakable, in my opinion.
Unfortunately. What's this about 12 Monkeys, though, Zach? I thought it was a or a show or movie. What? And it was a Terry Matalas show, wasn't it? The Picard season 3 showrunner?
Yeah. So this is coming from Daniel White, one of our writers at Lorehaven. He's seen both the show and the movie, and he says the show way better than the movie, which is fascinating to me because I love that movie so much. I watched it so many times in high school. It's with Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt very much plays an amazing crazy guy, and Bruce Willis just plays a regular old action hero type. It's in this sort of a pre-pandemic era that some people from the post-pandemic future have time traveled back to. And there's about to be a bioterrorism event that happens that they're trying to prevent or trying to learn how to survive or find a cure for. So there's a lot of time travel paradox things that happen. It's very melancholy. It definitely has a I don't know if you want to call it a Shakespearean kind of ending to it, but it has its own kind of beauty to it. So yeah, if the show can beat the movie, I really want to watch that. I just heard that from Daniel. Likewise, this is kind of another honorable mention, but there is a new adaptation of the Stephen King book, The Running Man. Stephen King book came out in the I believe in the early 80s under his pseudonym Richard Bachman. I watched the original Arnold Schwarzenegger adaptation of that from the late 80s, which is about this it's kind of like the Hunger Games, so it's like this brutal blood sport reality TV show in a dystopian future where people are actually killing each other just like we did in the gladiator coliseums once upon a time. And yet there's a character that's trying to game the system in order to overthrow it and tear it down and bring about justice and rescue other people. Schwarzenegger, of course, just plays an amazing action hero in that. But there is a new adaptation of this starring Glenn Powell from such movies as Twisters and Top Gun Maverick. And what I've been hearing about this is that it's a more faithful adaptation of the book. And it seems entirely different than the Schwarzenegger movie. And honestly, when I first saw the trailers, I'm like, I can't watch this. This is like totally destroying the legacy of Arnold. And why would you ever try to remake anything that the Schwarzenegger is in? But come to reading some reviews, it's like, no, this is really getting to the heart of what the original book was about. And so now I'm very intrigued because, again, this book surely inspired other books and shows like The Hunger Games. So it's always fun to go back and see what was the inspiration of those stories that you like.
Well, I already mentioned at the top of the show my enjoyment for Sir Kenneth Branagh's live-action Cinderella. I will also say that the other good Disney remake that I think is better than the original was Pete's Dragon. It's totally different. There's Pete, and then there's a dragon, and the setting and everything else is completely different. And I really like the film. It's also a very Narnian kind of film because it just focuses on that key theme of there's a dragon in these woods, and isn't that absolutely magical? And now I want to go back and see that now. We all criticize the Disney live action remakes, and apparently now they've finally gotten the point because they're starting to cancel some of those. And so there was much great rejoicing, but I'm not intrinsically opposed to a remake, especially if you thought, you know what, that original one was pretty good, but let's go back to the source material, or, let's redo this and set it in a different time, maybe draw out another theme of the book. And that, I think, illustrates the richness of a well-told book. It may actually be a very good book or a good source material that can inspire so many different remakes. I think it is a compliment, not necessarily an insult, to the original, that people feel so inspired by the story that they would rather remake the story if it was their idea. If it's a corporation is like, hey, let's do a cash grab, well, that's different. But even then, you might get faithful creators in there who really like the original or the original adaptation and are looking forward to offering a fresh perspective on it. Zach, I think that also goes for different adaptations of biblical narratives. Just within the past couple of years, we've had two takes on the David narrative. There's House of David, seasons 1 and 2 on Amazon Prime. And then there's also David, the animated film, which I still need to see. It was distributed by Angel Studios. Obviously, a totally different continuity and somewhat different audiences. David is more for young adults and adults, and the David, the animated film, is more for kids. I mean, it's a middle grade, focus there, but wholesome for the whole family and all of that. But I saw a clip from the animated film David of the David versus Goliath fight, and it was absolutely spectacular. a little bit different from the biblical version, but honoring the biblical version and really, I don't want to spoil it here because it's so cool, really owning in on the idea that Goliath's opponent was not David and not even the army of Israel. Goliath was defying God. And those who did that adaptation understood that Goliath hated God. And they also understood that the ultimate victor in that battle was not David, it was God. So that's like the best kind of sermon illustrated through adaptation. The way that Goliath dies in that clip in particular is just stunning. I'm getting chills just thinking about it, because what they were doing there was theology. So sometimes when you're retelling a Bible story, if people understand the rules of biblical fiction, they know there will be some changes. And the same goes for The Chosen, or whatever Mel Gibson is up to and all of that. Hopefully that's going to end up good as well. But you can draw out one of many biblical themes and emphasize that in your adaptation. And because the book of books will always be better than the films and the cartoons and the TV shows, the Bible has so many different thematic resources to flesh out for an adaptation.
Now, one brief mention I'll make here at the end. This is really just a setup for hopefully a future episode, because there's too many examples here, but it's the Philip K. Dick short stories, which many have been adapted into movies, many into TV episodes, TV shows, some all of the above. It's kind of a weird mishmash of things, and there's a great Wikipedia page that kind of lists all these out. And Philip K. Dick's stories are almost all short stories, or a few are novellas, some are novels. But his stories are fascinating and kind of weird, and you never really know what to think about these stories when you walk away from them. But when you see them in a movie, it makes a lot more sense. Again, because with movies, you have a certain expectation. His stories just are all over the place. But something I found really interesting, Stephen, is that when there was a TV series called Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams. Electric Dreams off of the, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which became Blade Runner. But that show is what's the right word? It's like an anthology, right? So each episode is different. It's kind of like the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits or something like that. But I watched a couple of those and they just kind of flopped as TV episodes. And I think it's because he wrote very rich characters in a rich world. And even as a short story, you're like, whoa, there's so much to explore here. We could really take this further. But it's like it didn't really work as it kind of works as a short story. It didn't really work as a standalone TV episode. It really needed to be a movie or a TV series. So maybe in the future we'll talk more about those, but it's just interesting how sometimes the movie format works better than even the book format when it's a short story like this. Well, to you, our listener, we want to know, what was your favorite adaptation of a book? What movie or TV show adaptation matched or exceeded the book? So send us your notes to podcast@lorehaven.com, or find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or our Discord server.
Next on Fantastical Truth, quote, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains." End quote. That's what the Lord Jesus promised his disciples about 2,000 years ago. How does his word, with support from fantastical fiction, help us prepare for armed conflicts across our real world? Sometimes it's fun to criticize stories, and we do that sometimes at Lorehaven. That's the whole escape bad books part of our mission. But I love topics like this, where we are finding the best as best we can. When stories are great, we want to celebrate those, flaws and all, but above all, respect, when we can, the motives of people making these stories, whether they are original or based on stories made by other people. Either way, these are all image bearers of Jesus. We can celebrate their work as we continue to seek and find Christ's fantastical truth.